My name is Naomi Carter, and I still remember the taste of that day, like iron and ashes. The church smelled of lilies and old wood polish, and my hands were shaking so quietly no one noticed. Everyone kept saying how strong I was, how composed. But they didn't see the storm behind my stillness, the way I was holding my breath, trying not to scream as his father looked me dead in the eye and said, "Now that he's gone, the property reverts to the Blood family." Just like that. No hesitation, no grief. It wasn't a condolence, it was a claim. And I smiled, because that's what women like me are taught to do when our world collapses. We smile and say we understand. But inside, something old and quiet in me cracked open. Something patient. Something that doesn't forgive easily. Before we move on, I need to be honest with you. My heart sank when I saw that 99% of you watch my videos but don't subscribe. It truly means the world when you do. It helps stories like this find the people who need them. So please take a second to subscribe. And don't forget to tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing your locations. It reminds me that stories really do connect us, no matter where we are. My name is Naomi Carter, and on the day they buried my husband, I learned what silence can do. It was cold, the kind of cold that crawls up through your shoes and into your bones. The pastor's voice drifted through the air like smoke, soft and distant, words about mercy and peace that no one really heard. People just nodded, dabbed their eyes, checked their phones. I stood at the front, veil trembling with each shallow breath, pretending to listen. Pretending to grieve the way they wanted me to. Neat, composed, photogenic. I remember his mother clutching pearls she didn't even like. His sister whispering too loudly to a cousin about the color of my dress, as if black came in shades of disrespect. But I didn't move. I kept my face still, my spine straight, my hands folded around the program that had his picture on it, smiling, alive, untouched by all this. Then his father stepped forward. Tall, pressed suit, voice steady like someone making a business deal. He placed a hand on my shoulder, too heavy, too firm, and leaned close enough for only me to hear. "Now that he's gone," he said, "the property reverts to Blood family." I blinked once, twice, like maybe I hadn't heard him right. The pastor was still speaking. People were bowing their heads. But all I could hear was that sentence, each word dragging nails through my calm. Reverts to Blood family, as if my love, my years, my labor in that house meant nothing. As if I had only ever been a guest in my own life. I didn't cry. I smiled. That was my first mistake. Or maybe my first act of war. Because that smile told him he hadn't broken me. Not yet. When the service ended, I stood at the graveside while they all drifted away. The family, the friends, the opportunists. The cold sun glared off the marble headstones. My heels sank into wet earth. And for the first time, I realized I was truly alone. Not because I lost a husband, but because I had never been seen in the first place. Later that evening, when the guests had eaten and left, I sat in our bedroom, his scent still in the sheets, and replayed his father's words. My hands shook, but not from grief anymore. From anger, sharp and clean, like glass in my veins. I thought about the years I spent managing that household, balancing the books, making sure every detail of the family business ran smoothly while they dismissed me as the good wife. I remembered the dinners where they spoke over me, the meetings I was asked to leave, the moments when my competence was treated as inconvenience. And now, they wanted to erase me. I looked around the room, the framed photographs, the desk where I helped him draft proposals, the faint outline of his cologne bottle on the dresser, everything we built together, now claimed by blood. But what they didn't know, what they could never imagine, was that I was the one who made sure the lights stayed on when their deals faltered. I was the one who found the investors, the one who noticed the missing zero on the quarterly reports. They had the name, but I had the knowledge. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark with a pen and notebook, listing everything I remembered, account numbers, business partners, small details from years of overheard conversations. My grief became a ledger. My love, a calculation. I promised myself 2 things before dawn. 1, I would not let them humiliate me again. And 2, I would never raise my voice. I'd let truth do the screaming for me. The next morning, when his father came to collect the house keys, for now, I greeted him with tea and a smile. My voice calm, my words polite. He didn't see the tremor in my hands, or maybe he did and mistook it for weakness. He said, "I'll have my assistant come by tomorrow to start clearing out what's yours." I nodded slowly, eyes steady. "What's mine?" I repeated, tasting the irony. He smirked, tapping the table like a judge announcing a verdict. "Yes, sentimental things. Jewelry, clothes. The rest belongs to the Carters," I smiled again. Because in that moment I finally understood who I was dealing with and what I would become. The quiet woman. The underestimated one. The one they thought would walk away quietly, but I wasn't walking away. I was learning how to move unseen, and when I was done, they'd wish they had let me keep my house. The next morning, the house was too quiet. The kind of quiet that presses against your chest and listens to your heartbeat like it's judging how long you'll last. The flowers from the funeral were already wilting on the counter, their petals bruised and soft, the stems bowed under their own weight. I made coffee I didn't drink. Sat at the kitchen table in my robe, staring at the mug until the steam disappeared. The walls felt wrong without his laughter, without his music humming low in the background. But grief wasn't the only ghost in that room. There was something else, something colder. A car pulled up outside. I didn't have to look to know who it was. The Carters didn't waste time. I watched from the window as his father stepped out, wearing the same pressed suit from the day before, only now with sunglasses that hid whatever was left of his soul. Behind him came a young man in a gray blazer, the family lawyer. I let them knock twice before opening the door. "Naomi," his father said smoothly, like we were meeting for brunch. "I appreciate you taking the time." I nodded, letting them in, my expression soft and neutral. "Of course," I said. "Please come in." The lawyer looked uncomfortable, clutching a folder to his chest. His father didn't sit. He preferred to stand, to loom. He glanced around the living room like an appraiser evaluating an antique. "I'll get straight to the point," he said. "You've always been level-headed, so I'm sure you'll understand. The property, this home, the lake house, and the business shares, technically belong to the Carter family trust. My son, rest his soul, was the beneficiary. With his passing, those assets revert to the bloodline." He said it all so casually, as if bloodline was a legal term and not a weapon. I asked quietly, "And what happens to me?" He smiled with pity. "You'll of course be taken care of. We'll make sure you have enough to start fresh somewhere else. Perhaps return to your own family." That word, your, cracked through me like thunder, as if I hadn't built this family from the ground up. As if my name had never been on the mortgage, the business filings, the charity paperwork. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Carter, if I may, there are some details in the will that we should review together." "Please," I said softly. "Go ahead." He hesitated before opening the folder. His hands trembled slightly. The most recent version of the will, dated 3 months ago, assigns control of all Carter Trust properties to Mr. Richard Carter Sr. upon the passing of his son. There is, however, an older version in which half of these assets were meant to transfer to you, Mrs. Carter. Unfortunately, that document was superseded. Superseded, I repeated, my voice steady but quiet. When exactly? He cleared his throat. Signed and notarized at the family office. Without your presence, of course. Your husband's signature appears legitimate. I looked at the paper, the ink, the faint outline of a signature I had seen 1,000 times before. Only something about it felt off. Too clean, too controlled, like it had been practiced. His father saw the flicker in my eyes and smiled. My son knew what was right for the family, he said. He wanted to make sure things stayed. Consistent. Another word for controlled. I didn't argue. I simply nodded and said, I understand. Because I did. I understood exactly what they'd done. and how far they'd go to bury me under paperwork and pretense. After they left, I walked through the house, touching each surface like I was saying goodbye. Not to the home, but to the woman I'd been in it. The quiet helper. The background figure. The one who made everything run smoothly so others could shine. By evening, I was packing. Not because they'd told me to, but because I needed to see what I could carry on my own. Each box I filled felt like an act of rebellion. I found old ledgers, USB drives, letters from clients, small breadcrumbs of the empire I had helped build. I tucked them away in my bag like seeds. Before midnight, the house lights dimmed to gold. I sat on the floor beside the fireplace, the folder the lawyer left resting in my lap. I traced my husband's name with my fingertip and whispered, "Did you really sign this?" The silence didn't answer. Only the ticking of the clock, slow and heavy. That was the moment I decided I wouldn't confront them head on. I'd let their arrogance build its own trap. I would learn every inch of the terrain they thought they owned. The companies, the trusts, the names. I would find the truth buried in their paperwork, because that's where men like them hide their sins, not in confession, but in fine print. When I finally stood, I looked around the house once more. The air smelled like fading lilies and old wood. I felt the first flicker of strength inside me. Quiet, steady, deliberate. They thought they had taken everything. They forgot that knowledge was mine long before the property ever was. The day they made me leave, the sun had no warmth. It was one of those mornings where the light looks clean but feels cold, the kind that exposes everything, every flaw, every forgotten detail. I stood in the foyer for what felt like hours, staring at the staircase I'd climbed 1,000 times, wondering how something that once felt so alive could now feel like a photograph. Boxes lined the hallway, sealed and labeled in neat black marker, Naomi, personal. Just 3 boxes. That's what my life had been reduced to. 3 boxes and a silence that hummed through the walls. When I opened the door to the master bedroom for the last time, the air inside was still heavy with his scent, cedarwood and bergamot. I walked around the bed, tracing the indentation where he used to sleep. I didn't cry. I had done all my crying in secret, long before the funeral. What was left now wasn't grief. It was calculation. I checked the drawers one last time. I wasn't looking for jewelry or keepsakes. I was looking for evidence. Something, anything, that could tell me the truth. About the man I married and the family who wanted to erase me, and I found it. Not much. Just a small black flash drive tucked inside the lining of his old leather wallet. It was nothing to the eye, but my gut told me it wasn't nothing. I slipped it into my pocket, my pulse steady. When I came downstairs, Richard Sr. was waiting at the front door. He didn't look at me at first. He was too busy talking to one of the movers, directing them like an orchestra conductor. When he finally turned toward me, his expression was what you'd expect from a man rehearsed in civility. "Leaving things behind never feels good," he said, with a sigh that almost sounded sincere. "I'm not leaving anything behind," I answered. "Just things that never belonged to me." He blinked, one slow, surprised blink, then smiled faintly, the way a predator smiles when the prey looks back. "You're a smart woman, Naomi," he said. "But this isn't a battle you can win. The law is clear," I met his gaze unflinching. "Then I suppose I'll just have to learn the law." He studied me for a long second, then chuckled quietly. "Be careful," he murmured. "Curiosity can be dangerous in this family." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The movers passed between us, carrying the last box. That's when I saw the look in his eyes. Not anger, not pity. Fear. Small, flickering, buried deep behind his confidence. He didn't think I'd fight, but he suspected I could. When they were gone, I stood in the empty house. It didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a stage after the actors have left. The curtains drawn, the dust settling. I walked room to room, touching each wall, each doorknob. Every corner carried echoes of conversations that used to mean something. The sound of him laughing in the kitchen, the click of my heels across the marble floor, the faint hum of the old record player we used on Sunday mornings. And underneath all that memory, I could feel the weight of the lies. The decisions made without me. The signatures that erased my name. Outside, the wind rose, whispering through the trees. I sat on the living room floor with my laptop, the flash drive burning in my pocket like a secret waiting to be spoken. When I finally plugged it in, the screen lit up. Rows of folders, all password protected except one. Inside, there was a document titled Trust Amendments Final. I opened it. It wasn't the will, it was correspondence. Emails between my husband and his father. The subject line read, "Regarding Naomi's involvement." My breath slowed. My fingers trembled. "She's asking questions again," my husband had written. "Keep her calm. Don't let her into the financials. If she insists, distract her. You're too soft on her." And below, his father's reply. "I warned you this would happen. Once you give a woman too much access, she starts thinking she's part of the family business. Handle it before she becomes a liability." A liability. That's what I had been reduced to in their world. Not a wife. Not a partner. Just a risk to be managed. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The hurt didn't hit like a punch. It came like a tide, slow and merciless. But under that tide, there was something steady and alive. Clarity. For years, I thought intelligence was something you hid to keep peace. That patience was a form of strength. But sitting there, in an empty house stripped of love and pretense, I realized patience could also be a weapon, if you learned how to wield it. I backed up the files, encrypted them, then closed my laptop. Outside, the light was fading to gold. The house looked softer in the dusk, like it was exhaling after years of being watched. I took one last walk through the garden, barefoot on the cold stone path, and whispered a quiet promise into the wind. They'll never see me coming. When I turned the key in the door for the last time, I didn't feel loss. I felt preparation, and as the lock clicked shut, the world on the other side began to shift, slowly, quietly, in my favor. I moved into a small apartment on the south side of town. Nothing like the Carter estate. The ceilings were low, the walls thin enough to hear my neighbor's late-night radio murmuring through the plaster. But the quiet here was mine. No one watched, no one measured my tone or counted my steps. For the first time in years, I could breathe without permission. The first few days, I didn't sleep much. I lived on coffee, stale croissants, and the hum of my laptop. I went through every file from that flash drive, every letter, every transaction. The more I read, the clearer it became. The Carter Trust wasn't just a family legacy. It was a machine, built to move money where questions couldn't follow. The paper trail was elegant in its deceit. Shell companies in Barbados, consulting fees to firms that didn't exist, bank accounts under initials I didn't recognize. It was like peeling back layers of expensive perfume until all that was left was rot. But beneath the disgust, I felt something else. Control. Knowledge. I wasn't lost anymore. I was inside the walls of their castle, unseen, uninvited, listening. At night, I kept the windows open, letting the city's noise replace the silence of the estate. The smell of exhaust, fried food, and rain, it felt real. I'd sit cross-legged on the floor, pen between my teeth, tracing connections across a notebook. The pages became a map of their empire, my handwriting weaving through numbers and names like arteries. One night, I noticed something strange. A transfer marked as Haven Logistics. It appeared small, 50,000 here, 100 there, but it repeated across multiple months, hidden in routine expenses. The receiving account was under a name I didn't know, L. Reed. I searched through public records, company databases, anything I could access without triggering suspicion. And there she was, Lydia Reed, listed as an external consultant for Carter Holdings. Except she wasn't real. The address linked to her invoices belonged to an abandoned warehouse by the docks. That was the first time I smiled in weeks. Because if Lydia Reed didn't exist, then someone was using her to move money. And I could use that to move truth. I copied everything. Created backups, documented timestamps. Then, just before dawn, I sent a polite message from an anonymous email to the Carter legal team. To whom it may concern, you may want to review payments made to Haven Logistics, as they appear inconsistent with declared audits. No signature. No threat. Just a whisper. By noon, I knew it had reached them. My phone lit up with messages from unknown numbers. First polite inquiries, then sharper tones. I ignored them all. The silence was my answer. Later that evening, a black car parked across from my building. It stayed there for hours. Headlights off, engine idling. I watched from the window, the flicker of streetlights reflecting off the windshield. My pulse stayed calm. I didn't need to see who was inside. I already knew. They were looking for a scared widow. They didn't realize they'd created a strategist. The next morning, I went to the city archives, a quiet building that smelled of dust and secrets. I spent hours combing through records, tracing every name I remembered from family dinners, every contractor they bragged about over wine. That's where I found the pattern. The Carter family had been laundering. Investments through nonprofits. Education? Funds and housing initiatives that never built a single classroom or roof my husband's name was on. Every form. I froze when I saw it. His handwriting, the loops of his signature, looked so gentle, so familiar. I wanted to believe he didn't know, that he had trusted his father the same way I once had. But the more I saw, the less innocence I could imagine. I sat back in my chair, the old fluorescent light buzzing above me. My throat tightened, not with tears, but with something colder. Clarity again. Sharper this time. I whispered to myself. They buried him with their secrets. And I realized that maybe the truth wasn't something I wanted to find. It was something I needed to use. That night, I returned home to find an envelope slipped under my door. No name, just a single sheet of paper inside. Typed words. We know what you're doing. Stop before you regret it. No signature. No punctuation. Just a threat. I sat on the couch, reading it again and again until the paper creased. Then I tore it neatly in half, fed it to the flame of a candle, and watched the edges curl into black lace. Because now I knew I was close. And when men like them start sending warnings, it means you've finally become dangerous. I poured myself a glass of water, looked out at the city, and whispered to the dark, almost smiling. Good. Let's see how much they regret underestimating me. Morning came wrapped in mist. The city outside my window looked half dream, half memory. Buildings fading into fog, traffic muffled, the world holding its breath. I hadn't slept. I'd spent the night piecing together threads, stitching their lies into a pattern only I could see. By now, I understood one thing. The Carters didn't build their fortune on family. They built it on paper. Contracts, amendments, trust deeds, words written in ink instead of truth. And if they were going to bury me under signatures, I would bury them under evidence. I dressed with precision. Black slacks, gray turtleneck, hair tied back. Nothing flashy, just enough to be invisible in plain sight. When I looked at myself in the mirror, I almost didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her eyes were quiet but deliberate, like she'd already decided how the story would end. My first call was to a lawyer I'd once met at a charity gala, Denise Alvarez. She'd been one of the few people who spoke to me as if I had a mind. A woman who didn't need to prove her power because she carried it like a heartbeat. When she answered, her tone was cautious but warm. Naomi, it's been a while. I need someone who can look into a trust agreement, I said softly. Confidentially, a pause. Then, is this about your husband's estate? It's about what's left of it, I replied. And what was taken? She didn't ask for details. Just an address and a time. That's how you know you've found the right kind of ally. The one who doesn't flinch at the word revenge when it's disguised as justice. We met at a small cafe near the courthouse. The air smelled of espresso and old books. Denise wore navy blue, her glasses perched low, her notebook already open. I slid a manila envelope across the table, copies of the emails, the trust documents, and the hidden accounts I'd uncovered. She flipped through them in silence, her brow tightening as she read. Finally, she looked up. "Naomi," she said, "this isn't just fraud. This is criminal. Money laundering, tax evasion, falsified documents. If this all connects back to your husband's father." "It does," I said. She exhaled a low whistle. "They'll come for you when they realize how much you know." "They already have." Her eyes narrowed. "Then we move first." That sentence lit something inside me. We. It had been so long since anyone had said that word like it included me. We spent hours mapping out a plan. Not a courtroom war, not yet. Paper first. Paper always. Denise called it the rehearsal of justice. Before you fight power, you make it look at itself. Over the next week, legal letters began to circulate. Polite, clinical, deadly. They didn't accuse. They inquired. Requests for clarification. Questions about audit discrepancies. Notices of missing filings. Each one crafted to draw blood without leaving fingerprints. By the third day, Richard Carter Sr. called. His number flashed on my screen. I let it ring twice before answering. "Naomi," he said, voice smooth as ever. "I got some very concerning mail this morning." "I imagine you did. You think this is wise? Stirring old ashes? You're grieving." "People make mistakes in grief. Maybe," I said quietly. "But I've always been careful with paper, especially the kind that burns slowly." A silence stretched. Then his tone hardened. "You're playing a dangerous game." "Then you should have learned the rules before inviting me to the table." I hung up before he could reply. My hand trembled, not from fear, but from the thrill of finally speaking without asking permission. That night, I sat at my desk surrounded by folders and notes, the faint hum of the city outside. I traced my finger along the edge of one contract, noticing the embossed seal of the Carter Trust, the family crest, polished and proud, blood and paper. That's what their empire was. But bloodstains and paper tears. I opened a fresh notebook and began writing the timeline. Every transaction, every lie, every falsified form. Not because I needed it for court, but because I needed to see it laid bare. To remind myself that monsters often look like men in suits. By midnight, a storm had started. Rain tapped against the windows in a slow rhythm. I poured myself tea and stood by the glass, watching lightning flicker over the skyline. For the first time since the funeral, I felt something close to peace. Not because I was safe, but because I was finally dangerous in a language they understood. Somewhere deep down, I knew this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about respect. About rewriting the story they thought they'd finished. And as thunder rolled in the distance, I whispered to the reflection in the window. They built this on paper. I'll end it on paper. The morning after the storm, I woke to silence. Not peace, the kind of silence that presses against the walls, waiting. The air was heavy, charged, like the pause before something breaks. When I stepped outside, there it was, a black car parked across the street. Same make, same plate I'd seen 3 nights ago when I left Denise's office. They weren't even trying to hide anymore. I didn't panic. Panic is a privilege for the unprepared. Instead, I made coffee, sat by the window and let them watch me. Let them wonder what I already knew. Denise called at 9:03 sharp. "They've frozen your late husband's secondary account," she said, voice clipped. "They're moving assets under a shell company registered in Delaware." Classic panic move. "So the letters worked?" I said, stirring sugar into my cup, hand steady. "They're rattled," she confirmed. "But Naomi, when rich men get rattled, they get reckless. You need to be careful," I smiled, though she couldn't see it. I've been careful my whole life. That's how I survived them. That afternoon, I went to the Carter estate, not the house I shared with David, but the old mansion perched on the hill, the one that smelled of cedar and judgment. I hadn't been there since the funeral, and every step through those gates felt like walking into a grave I was finally ready to exhume. The housekeeper, Mrs. Lang, met me at the door. Her eyes softened when she saw me. "Miss Naomi, you shouldn't be here." "I know," I said quietly. "That's why I came." Inside, the air was thick with memory. Portraits of men in suits watched from the walls, the Carter lineage, framed in oil and arrogance. I paused in front of David's picture, the only one that didn't look like it belonged. His smile was real. His eyes had warmth. Maybe that's why they hated him, and by extension, me. Voices came from the study. I recognized them immediately. Richard's low drawl, his brother's sharp whisper. I didn't knock. I opened the door. The conversation stopped cold. Papers lay scattered across the desk, bank statements, legal drafts, a half-drunk glass of scotch. "Well," Richard said, forcing a smile, "look who finally decided to come home." "I never lived here," I replied. He leaned back, pretending calm. "You're making this harder than it has to be. You think stirring trouble changes anything? You married into this family, Naomi. You don't own it." I took a slow breath. "No," I said. "But I remember who did." I placed a flash drive on the desk. It clicked softly against the wood. "Everything I've found, the offshore transfers, the falsified audits, the tax fraud. It's all backed up and time-stamped." Richard's smile faltered. "What do you want?" "I want you to remember my husband's name when you talk about what you built on his death." "You're bluffing." I met his eyes. "Try me." For a second, no one breathed. Then his brother stood, face flushed. "You think you can threaten us? You have no idea who you're dealing with?" I finished. "I know exactly who you are. Men who mistake silence for weakness. Men who call theft inheritance. I've known your kind since the day you looked at me and saw someone you could control." The room was electric. Richard's hand tightened around his glass until it cracked. He didn't shout. That would have been too honest. He just whispered, venom dripping between each word. "You don't belong in this family, Naomi. Never did." I stepped closer, close enough to smell the whiskey on his breath. "Maybe not. But your empire does. Right in my inbox." I turned and walked out before he could answer. Every step down that hallway echoed like a verdict. By the time I reached my car, my heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear the rain starting again. My hands trembled against the steering wheel. Not from fear this time, but from something sharper. Clarity. That night, Denise called again. "Whatever you said today," she murmured. "It worked. I just got notice. They're moving to negotiate a settlement. That's corporate code for they're scared." I stared out at the city lights, feeling the first crack of triumph beneath my ribs. "Good," I said. "Let them sweat." But then she hesitated. "Naomi, there's something else." I ran the property deeds again. "One of the signatures, your husband's, it's forged." The words hit like a slap. "What?" "Forged. Dated after his death." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The room tilted, the lights blurring into soft gold streaks. All this time I'd thought they'd stolen from me. But now I realized they'd erased him. Denise's voice was quiet on the line. "Naomi, this isn't just fraud anymore. It's a crime scene." I closed my eyes. Outside, the thunder rolled again, distant but moving closer. "They thought they could bury him in silence," I whispered. "But they just dug their own grave." The next morning, the world felt thinner, like the air itself had secrets. I couldn't shake Denise's words. A forged signature. My husband's name, copied by another hand, as if his life could be imitated into existence just long enough to steal what he left behind. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at his handwriting on an old birthday card, the way his R's leaned slightly right, how his loops closed like small promises. Whoever forged that deed had tried to mimic him, but love has its own kind of literacy. "You can't fake the hand that once touched your face," Denise called again, her tone low, careful. "Naomi, I pulled the notary logs. The deed was certified by someone named Mark Hanlon. He's been working with Carter Holdings for over a decade, so he's loyal to them." "Maybe," she said. But loyalty bends when pressure finds the right place. I've reached out quietly. If he agrees to talk, we'll have proof. Enough to open a case. Proof. That word felt heavy. Proof meant danger. Proof meant the truth was finally leaving the shadows. That night I drove. No destination, just movement. The city blurred past, rain-slick streets, neon reflecting off puddles, the hum of my tires on wet asphalt. Somewhere between the stoplights and the silence, I began to hear David's voice again. Not words, not ghosts, just the rhythm of him. Calm, measured. The way he'd always said, "Don't let them make you angry. Anger gives them control." I wasn't angry anymore. I was cold. Focused. 2 days later, Denise texted, "He'll talk. Meet me at the old courthouse, West Annex. Noon." When I arrived, the place was almost deserted. Mark Hanlon looked smaller than I imagined, a man deflated by his own guilt. His hands shook when he handed over the folder. "I didn't know they'd use it like that," he muttered. "They said it was routine. Standard transfer." The signature came pre-filled. I just stamped it. "After he was dead," I said quietly. He swallowed hard. "I'm sorry. I didn't ask questions." "You don't. Not with them." Denise slid the folder into her briefcase. "You realize this is perjury, Mark. If you testify, I'll testify," he said. "If it means they stop calling at night?" That sentence lingered in the air like smoke. When he left, I turned to Denise. "They threatened him? Seems like they're threatening everyone who ever signed a Carter document." I looked toward the courthouse windows. Outside, sunlight cut through the gray clouds, thin but sharp. "Then they've already lost," I said. People only threaten when they're scared, but fear, I'd learned, moves in circles. That night, I came home to find my apartment door slightly ajar. The air inside smelled faintly of cologne. Expensive, masculine, wrong. I didn't step inside. I called Denise first, voice low. "Someone's been here. Naomi, get out, now, I'll call it in." I walked backward into the hallway, every muscle wired. Then I saw it, on my dining table, a single sheet of paper. My husband's name, written in ink. David Carter, only this time it was his real handwriting. His real signature. From an old mortgage file I'd locked away. They'd been here to send a message. They wanted me to know they could touch what was his. What was mine? When the police arrived, they found nothing missing. No fingerprints. No cameras working. Just that single page, sitting like a ghost on the table. Later, I sat in Denise's office, still shaking. She placed a hand on mine. "Naomi, we'll put you somewhere safe until this settles." "No," I said. "They expect fear." "I'm done giving it to them." Her voice softened. "Then what do you plan to do?" I looked at the window, the city lights flickering like tiny confessions. "Finish what David started. They forged his name to steal his legacy. I'll use mine to take it back." The next day, I sent Richard Carter Sr. a certified letter, not from a lawyer, but from me. It contained one sentence, handwritten in ink. "For every document you forged, I'll show them one truth you buried. No threats. No anger, just precision." That night, I couldn't sleep. I stood on my balcony, feeling the cold wind press against my face. Somewhere below, a car door slammed, the same black sedan idling across the street. I whispered into the dark, "Keep watching. The show's just getting good." And in that moment, I realized I wasn't afraid of being hunted anymore. Because hunters forget. When you chase someone long enough, they learn your steps. They start to walk ahead of you. I drove back to the Carter estate at dusk. The sky hung low and purple, the kind of color that looks like bruised skin before it fades. The house sat at the end of the winding drive, tall, quiet, deceitful. I had stood outside its doors as a daughter-in-law once. Tonight, I came as something else entirely. The reckoning they thought would never come. The gates opened with their familiar groan. Every sound felt deliberate, as though the house itself was aware I'd come to exhume its ghosts. I parked beneath the same oak that had shaded our wedding photos. The irony wasn't lost on me. Back then, that tree had been a symbol of family roots. Now it just looked like it was watching. Inside, the mansion was too still. The air carried the faint smell of lemon polish and whiskey. I moved through the hall slowly, my heels barely touching the floor. Portraits stared down from the walls, generations of men who'd called themselves builders, though what they built was a dynasty of debt and deceit. I found Richard in his study. He didn't look surprised to see me, only tired. Maybe he'd been expecting this moment, or maybe men like him always knew the day would come when the silence they built would start to crack. He gestured toward a chair. "You really shouldn't be here, Naomi." I didn't sit. "You forged my husband's name." His jaw tightened. "You can't prove that." "I can," I said. "And I will." He sighed, the sound thick and performative. "You think anyone will care? You think a few missing signatures will bring down a family that's been doing business for half a century?" I looked around the study, the shelves of law books, the marble clock, the framed degrees. Half a century of rot doesn't make it legacy, Richard. It just makes it practiced. He stood, voice rising. "You don't understand what we built. What your husband inherited." I stepped closer. "He didn't inherit anything. You took it from him before he even had the chance to claim it. You forged his name, drained his accounts, rewrote his will. And now you want me to stay quiet?" For a moment, his face softened, almost human. "You don't know what David did." My breath caught. "What are you talking about?" He leaned against the desk, eyes glinting. "You think he was innocent in all this? The offshore accounts, the missing money, that didn't start with me." I stared at him, my heartbeat loud in my ears. "You're lying," he smiled faintly. "Am I? Ask Denise where the first transfer came from. Ask her which signature approved it. You'll see your husband's name there long before I touched a thing." The room tilted. I wanted to shout, but the truth in his tone made my throat close. "Why are you telling me this?" I whispered. "Because I'm tired," he said simply. "And because if I'm going down, I won't be the only Carter who burns." I turned and walked out before the weight of his words could crush me. The hallway stretched like a corridor in a dream, long, dim, endless. My reflection followed me in the glass frames, eyes hollow, steps slow. Outside, the air was sharp. I leaned against my car, staring up at the mansion's dark windows. The idea of David, the man I'd loved, the man I'd mourned, twisted painfully inside me. Could Richard be right? Could the person I'd built my life around have built his legacy on deceit? I called Denise. She answered on the second ring. "I need you to check something," I said. "Those accounts we traced go back to the start. The first wire, the first authorization. I want to know whose name signed it." There was a pause. Then softly, "Naomi, are you sure you want that answer?" "I need it," I said. "Whatever it is," she sighed. "Give me till morning." When I hung up, I sat in the car for a long time, listening to the rain begin again. The sound was soft, like fingers on glass. I thought about David's smile, his late nights at the office, the way he used to say, "It's almost over, baby. Just one more deal." I'd assumed he meant exhaustion. But now I wondered, one more deal for who? As I drove away, the mansion disappeared behind me, swallowed by fog. It no longer looked like a house. It looked like a lie that had learned how to stand upright. That night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep. I sat on my bed reading the last message David ever sent me. Just 5 words. "Trust me. It's for us." For the first time, I didn't know whether those words were a promise or a confession. Morning light came reluctantly, pale, sickly, the color of doubt. I hadn't slept. The city outside my window was awake but quiet, as if it too was waiting to see whether truth or grief would win today. Denise called just after dawn. Her voice was softer than usual, hesitant. "Naomi, I found it." I closed my eyes. "Tell me." "The first transfer. It was authorized from David's email, yes. But the timestamp was wrong. The IP address came from a Carter Holdings server." And she hesitated. "The signature, Naomi. It's not his." I exhaled slowly, my heart caught between relief and rage. Then it was all them. "Yes." They used his name even before he died. They were cleaning up their mess by pinning it on him. I stared out the window, watching sunlight crawl weakly across the rooftops. So they didn't just steal from him. They buried him in their crimes. Denise's voice tightened. It's worse than that. I think he found out. The last few documents he signed, there are notes in the margins written in shorthand. He was planning to expose them. My breath hitched. He knew. He knew, she said. And they made sure he didn't get the chance. The silence between us was thick enough to drown in. That day, I went to the cemetery for the first time in months. His grave sat on a gentle slope beneath an oak, the grass damp from last night's rain. I knelt beside the headstone, tracing his name with my fingers. David, I whispered. I thought you left me with a mess. But you were trying to save me from one. The wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of earth and lilacs. For a moment, it almost felt like he was there. Not a ghost, but a memory with unfinished business. When I got back to my car, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Stop digging. The dead don't need your help. No signature. No context. Just those words. I didn't forward it to Denise. I didn't even save the number. I just stared at it until the screen went dark. And then, without thinking, I whispered, "You've already buried the wrong person." That evening, I visited Denise again. Her office smelled of coffee and rain-damp paper. She had spread out the files across her desk. Trust documents, bank statements, scanned signatures. She pointed to one sheet. "Here," she said. "This one was drafted a week before David's accident. It's the trust transfer that shifted everything into his father's control. It's also the one that has the forged signature." I looked closer. The pen strokes were deliberate but cold, mechanical. No hesitation, no heart. Whoever forged it wasn't trying to imitate David. They were erasing him, I whispered. If he found out, then his death wasn't an accident. Denise's eyes met mine. "I can't say that, not without proof. But Naomi, it's time to decide how far you're willing to go." I sat back, feeling the weight of everything pressing down. Grief, betrayal, the impossible choice between justice and peace. "Farther than they think," I said finally. "I've been quiet my whole life. I know what silence costs." That night, I opened David's old laptop. It had been sitting on the closet shelf for months, untouched. I powered it on, and the screen flickered to life. His desktop, frozen in time. Photos of us from the lake house. His notes folder, locked with a password. It took me 3 tries to guess it. Naomi 28. My birthday inside were files labeled Legacy, Audit Trail, and one simply called Truth. When I opened the last one, I found video clips, short recordings, shaky but clear. David's face tired, eyes hollow. "If you're seeing this," he said, "I didn't make it. They're moving money through shell companies. My father, my uncle, they're in deep. I tried to warn them. They think they're untouchable. But the paper trail's there, Naomi. Find Denise. She'll know what to do." I couldn't breathe. My hands trembled, tears spilling without permission. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I should have told you sooner. But I wanted to keep you safe. I love you. And if I can't stop them, make sure they remember my name." The video ended. I sat there in the dark, the glow of the laptop the only light in the room. Outside, thunder rolled again, soft, distant, like applause for the dead. I closed the laptop and whispered into the silence, "I will. David, I'll make them remember." The night I found David's recordings, something inside me shifted. It wasn't rage. Rage burns too hot, too fast. This was colder, a kind of clarity that sharpens you until even your breath feels like a blade. For months, I'd been reacting to them, running circles around their lies, surviving their traps. But David's words rewired me. He hadn't left me with chaos. He'd left me a map. I spent the next few days in quiet preparation. I took leave from work, told no one where I was going. My apartment became a command center. Papers spread across the floor, coffee cooling beside open files, the glow of the laptop casting long shadows. Denise came by one night. her hair pulled back, exhaustion written in the corners of her eyes. "Naomi," she said softly, "you can't do this alone." "They have money, lawyers, power. I don't need power," I said without looking up. "I need precision," she sighed. "What's your plan?" I turned the laptop toward her. On the screen was David's video, paused mid-frame, his eyes meeting mine from the past. "He left evidence," I said. "Enough to destroy them. But we have to make it public before they can bury it again." Denise studied the screen for a long moment. "You're talking about going public? Whistleblower-level exposure?" "Yes. That'll make you a target." I finally met her gaze. "I already am one." We spent hours piecing it together. The timeline, the shell companies, the falsified deeds. Every document had a purpose, every number a voice. When you looked at them long enough, the whole thing read like scripture, a testament to greed and arrogance. Denise leaned back finally. "If we leak this to the press, they'll deny everything. They'll smear you, drag David's name through the mud. You know that, right?" "I do," I said. "But this isn't about revenge anymore. It's about restoration. David's legacy deserves the truth, and I won't let his story end in someone else's signature." The next day, I called a journalist I'd once met at a charity event, Miles Carter. No relation to them. He was young, skeptical, but fair. The kind of reporter who didn't chase headlines. He chased patterns. We met at a diner off the interstate, neutral ground. The smell of fried food and old coffee filled the air. I handed him the flash drive. "Everything's on there," I said. "Names, accounts, proof of the forgery? You'll have to verify it, but it's real." He frowned. "If this is what you say it is, these people will come after you." "They already have," I said. "But now they'll know I can't be silenced." He nodded, pocketing the drive. "You understand, once this goes out, there's no going back." I smiled faintly. "Good, I'm done looking back." That night I couldn't sleep. I walked the apartment in circles, the city lights flashing like restless ghosts through the window. I thought about David again, about how he'd fought alone, quietly, hoping decency would win. But decency doesn't win against corruption. Strategy does. At 2:17 a.m., my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number again? "You don't know what you've started. This time?" I replied. "You're right. You don't know what I've finished." Then I powered the phone off and placed it face down. By dawn, the first article was live. Miles had worked fast, faster than I expected. The headline burned across the screen. "Carter's under federal investigation. Whistleblower reveals decades of financial fraud." My name wasn't mentioned yet, but it didn't matter. The story was out and the city was buzzing. News vans parked outside the Carter headquarters. The family's lawyers issued denials within hours. But the tone was defensive, panicked. When I turned on the TV, Richard's face filled the screen, pale, cornered, the cracks in his mask finally showing. Reporters shouted questions. He ignored them, but the way his jaw twitched told me everything. He knew exactly who had done this. I stood in my living room, coffee cup trembling in my hands, watching the empire that once crushed me begin to crumble in public daylight. And yet, beneath the satisfaction, there was grief, a deep, hollow ache. Because all of this came too late for David. Justice always comes too late for the dead. That evening, Denise called. Her voice carried something between awe and fear. "Naomi, you did it. The FBI just opened an inquiry. They're freezing assets. The Carters can't touch a cent." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Tears stung my eyes, but they weren't from sadness. They were from release. "They tried to bury him," I whispered. "Now his name is the headline that ruins them." Denise exhaled, half laugh, half sob. "You really are your husband's widow." I smiled faintly. "No, I'm his continuation." When the storm finally came for them, it didn't arrive with thunder. It came quietly, through subpoenas, frozen accounts, and silent boardroom betrayals. 3 days after the story broke, Carter Industries ceased trading on the market. Their PR team scrambled, spinning narratives of clerical errors and corporate misunderstandings, but every word only deepened the wound. The media smelled blood. By the end of the week, 3 executives had resigned. One had fled the country. And Richard Carter vanished from public sight entirely, but not from mine. I'd expected satisfaction, the thrill of victory after years of humiliation. Instead, I felt something stranger. A stillness. The kind that comes when the fight you've lived for is finally over. Until one morning, I received a plain white envelope under my door. No name, no return address. Inside, a single photograph. It was taken from afar, the crumbling edge of an old pier. And at the end of it, standing alone in the fog, was Richard. Behind him, the water churned gray and endless. No message. Just the image. Denise came over when I called her. She studied it, brow furrowed. "You think it's a threat?" "No," I said quietly. "I think it's an invitation." She stared at me. "You're not seriously considering—" "I need to see him," I interrupted. "For closure." "Naomi, closure doesn't come from confronting ghosts." I looked at the photograph again. "No," I said softly. "But sometimes ghosts need to know they're seen." The pier was deserted when I arrived that evening. The air was thick with sea mist, the wood slick beneath my shoes. Gulls screamed overhead, harsh, ugly sounds that felt almost human in their grief. Richard was already there, just like the photo. His once perfect suit was wrinkled, his eyes hollowed out. When he turned and saw me, he didn't look surprised. "Only tired. I knew you'd come," he said. "I almost didn't," I replied. "But then I remembered what you said the day you took my home, that power belongs to those who can live without conscience." He gave a bitter smile. "And here you are, Naomi, the woman who destroyed me without blinking." "Destroyed you?" I stepped closer, the wood creaking beneath me. "You destroyed yourself." I just held up a mirror. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The waves crashed softly against the pylons, the world narrowing to the space between us. Finally, he said, "Do you really think this changes anything? Another name will take my place. Another family will rise. You didn't burn the system. You just changed the faces." I met his gaze. "Maybe, but I burned your empire. And that's enough." His jaw tightened. "You and David were naive. You thought the world rewarded truth. It doesn't." "You're wrong," I said. "It doesn't reward truth. It reveals it, eventually." He laughed then. A hollow, broken sound. "So what now?" "You walk away and feel good about it." I looked out at the gray horizon. "No, I walk away and feel free." There was a silence so heavy it seemed to press the air flat. Then Richard turned toward the water, hands in his pockets. "David thought he could save the world," he murmured. "But he couldn't even save himself." I took a step closer. "And you thought you could own the world. But look where it left you." He didn't answer. A long, quiet minute passed before he finally said, almost to himself, "Do you ever think about forgiveness?" "Every day," I said. "But forgiveness isn't something you earn. It's something you lose when you forget what it means." He nodded slowly, his gaze lost in the mist. "Then I guess I've lost everything." I wanted to say something final, something that would close the book forever. But there was nothing left to say. So I turned and walked away. Behind me, I heard the soft shuffle of movement, the sound of the wind picking up. I didn't turn back. Whether he stayed, whether he walked into the water, I never knew. And I didn't want to, because in that moment, the story stopped being his, it became mine. Weeks later, I stood before a small crowd at a charity foundation that had once belonged to David. His name was now engraved on the marble entrance. The David Hale Trust for Truth and Reform. I took the stage, heart steady. "David believed truth was fragile," I began, my voice echoing in the hall. "But he also believed that it's the only thing that endures when everything else falls apart." Today, his legacy stands not as a memory of loss, but as proof that even against corruption, one voice can still echo loud enough to change the silence. The audience rose in applause. Cameras flashed. Somewhere in the back row, Denise smiled, proud, tearful. When it was over, I stepped outside into the cool evening. The city skyline glowed gold against the darkening sky. I thought of David again, of the laughter, the quiet mornings, the love that started it all. And I smiled. The empire had fallen. But love, the real kind, the kind that builds rather than consumes, had outlasted everything.